Well, I feel fortunate that I have lived here as long as I have, because that gave me a nice base of understanding. And I think part of the problem is at the state level, it's very hard to look out across the landscape and say, well, we understand all these different counties on the Eastern Shore. The tendency is to want to lump them together. And we are all very different, and it is a challenge to do economic development in Talbot County, but it's also a great, it's a tremendous opportunity. Nothing's ever the same. It's a wonderful challenge. And you do have to be extremely strategic. There is such an awareness here of how fragile everything is and how beautiful it is and how fortunate we are to still have these vast landscapes, which a lot of our areas don't have on the East Coast. So we're very mindful of that. We're also very mindful of the role that agriculture and industry play in our makeup. And so many want to dismiss that as an area that we're not interested in. We're not interested in manufacturing. But in fact, manufacturing affords us our middle class, which affords us our housing market demand and our retail demand and our consumer demand. So they're a very important component, and we work very hard behind the scenes to try and make sure that our agriculture base and our manufacturing base have the resources they need. Of course, with the mountain of regulation that's coming at us, it's really difficult. And so we get labeled as not friendly for business, and that's a very hard line to walk.
Yeah,
and you have to be very strategic in the kinds of business you want to attract.
Yeah.
And that requires infrastructure and development.
I
think you hit on something, and that is that people who come to the Eastern Shore come here because they want to be here. They're not coming here because they have, tremendous technology, a huge workforce to choose from, immediate access to market. They're coming here because they want to be here. And in that decision comes a lot of consideration for what do you have to do to be successful in business. The incentives certainly help if you have a nice incentive package, and I believe that Dorchester County is working very hard on that right now, and they have some very attractive things happening there. But in the end, a manufacturer or a technology business is making a decision based on how stable they're going to be and how much revenue they're going to generate. So an incentive is only an attraction to get them to visit you. Once they're here and they decide they want to be here, that's when the real work begins in making sure that they can get their building up on time, that they can find their workforce, that they can get their transportation routes established. And so it doesn't happen, the frequency with which we see development in this part of the world is much less. Mostly we're growing our business from the businesses who are already here. Those are the ones who are growing and providing us with our economic growth, quite frankly. We, like the rest of the state and probably the country, suffered when a lot of manufacturing moved offshore. And Black & Decker is a perfect example. They were quite a large employer, not only for Talbot County, but for the whole Eastern Shore. So when they left, it was just coincidental that the whole healthcare industry rose. And so we have that. We have a lot of people who left jobs in manufacturing and went to jobs in healthcare. But we still retain a couple of other strong manufacturers in our area, and those companies have definitely, several of them have been purchased by larger corporations, but they still have a base here and they're still employing. The workforces are very loyal, they're maturing, they are incredibly skilled and know what they do and do what they know very well. One example is a small little company that started here. They do analysis for chemical companies on environmental impact, and they have grown to 150 employees from just 2 founders starting at 30 years ago. Afina Pharma is a pharmaceutical packaging company. It was once part of Celeste Industries. Celeste Industries is still retained as a separate company. They're now owned by Illinois Tool Works. So we have a nice little base. We have some defense contractors in the area who have come and grown, and I think all the counties on the Eastern Shore feel as though we have a niche for those kinds of companies because we have the bay between us, which is a nice barrier for if you're talking about secure, if you're talking about being able to locate computer data systems. one of our fastest growing companies has been Quality Health Strategies, and they're one of the top 5% data banks in the country. And they just happened to be here because the owner lived here and wanted to grow the company here. And there are 400 people now, 225 here in Talbot County. But what people many times don't understand is that we do have that internet infrastructure that can support high-tech business. And so when you're looking strategically on the East Coast and you want to run a very highly sensitive cyber company, this is a perfect backup or a perfect place to be under the radar. You can jump back into the city in an hour, hour and a half, and have your location secured and on a separate network.
So that
well, everything's changing pretty rapidly right before our eyes. So we used to think about the printing industry. Because the printing industry was huge in Maryland. It was the #1 industry in Maryland, you know? And we don't print like we used to. We don't have the number of people in print that we used to. And so our print shops, our Waverlys, and our Cadmus Journal services have been, you know, just evaporated overnight. But manufacturing is, it's a highly technical area right now, and sometimes it requires 12 to 25, 30 people, and they're making very sophisticated component parts. They tend to want to be with other manufacturers, and technology companies want to be with other similar technologies. So for example, Maryland has a strategic direction with cyber, and we see Fort Meade and Aberdeen and a huge amount of cyber contracting and out of the fort, NSA, driving a lot of small startup tech-based companies. And information technology is not that much different from manufacturing. You're just using people and brains instead of widgets, but you're making something proprietary, and that's where the value is. And so on the Eastern Shore, we still have a presence with food production. It's a huge industry here because of the poultry industry. And there are innovations going on all the time around that. And so the opportunity is to try and start or attract some small companies that are making something of value and have them based in your economy, because they generate revenue, they generate dollars. It doesn't just circulate the dollars. So the farmer is incredibly important because he grows a crop and he gets money for that crop, and that money comes into our economy. As our economies get more complicated, we tend to get more fragmented, I think. And this is a trend that's happening across the country. Annapolis has their very strong economic development corporation, and then we have the county economic development group, which is also a private nonprofit. So there's a couple of things going on here, but we just completed a strategic plan for the county and the towns, and it's one of the first times that's been done, where the county and the towns have come together to look at how we want to develop our economy over the next 5 to 10 years. And one of the recommendations was to form a private nonprofit economic development corporation. And at the same time, Easton had decided they were going to do that. So in Talbot County, we have a curious situation in that we get to watch this unfold while we continue to work with Easton and TRAP, Oxford, St. Michael's, and try to support one another in the economic development efforts. In the past, the counties had the bigger budget, so they were able to go out for bond. They were able to put money into roads and industrial parks. But anymore, the county budgets are so restrained with the requirements that they have to fund now, the unfunded mandates, that we're, I think, approaching more of a level playing field when it comes to how much resource can you put into economic development. And the tendency in the towns is to focus more on the downtowns and the retail and the commercial, where in the county the focus is on job development, high-end job development, because that's where you get your higher income tax and your property tax. And so we're trying, our focus is on the infrastructure, manufacturing, tech development, and a lot of the job is to go out and market the area to attract or to help the existing business base grow. So they can play slightly different roles. Some town economic development entities are very interested in the industrial corporate development as well as the downtown. I think it has to play out based on the resource and the strength of the offices that are formulated. But everything is getting smaller, and so I think there are some great examples across the state of where either private or town entities have formed smaller economic development concerns, and it's been helpful as well. I think everyone understands that we have a very protective mentality in our county, whether it's justified or not. I guess the natives believe it is. but I think it's important for us to come together as a community and understand that we want to hold that dear while we go out and try to bring in some revenue, and where would that go and what would that look like, and so everybody can feel good about that and talk about it in a positive way.
Do you buy into the tool of the CDC?
Community Development Corporation.
EDC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there again, it's as strong as your board, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of when you remove the leadership of the mission of economic development from the elected officials and put it in the hands of a board, you're making a shift in the way you think about economic development. I think as long as you're aware of how you get the inputs to both groups and how you guide the process, if you're aware of that, I think either one can be very successful. And Arundel County's done a great job. They've developed all kinds of technology incubators and tech councils around their tremendous business core with Fort Meade and that whole area.
So